They said a man would be waiting for her, but when the train screeched to a stop at Pine Ridge, Wyoming, no one called her name, Grace Whitmore stumbled down the iron steps, her dress torn at the hem, one sleeve ripped clean off, the white fabric smeared with dust and blood. Her parasol was gone. It must have rolled under the seat when the train lurched again, her hat trampled somewhere between the last carriage and a nightmare she couldn't forget. It had happened only an hour earlier. The train had stopped at a small junction. 3 drunks climbed aboard, laughing, stinking of whiskey. One older passenger tried to stand between them, but the men pushed him back hard into his seat. The conductor somewhere up the line, maybe in another car, unaware of the noise. When one reached for her skirt, she shoved him with all the strength she had. Just then, the train lurched forward, the wheels screaming. She used that sudden jolt to push him hard into the seat. Grabbing her carpet bag and running for the next car, the slap caught her across the arm, leaving a bruise that would bloom purple before the day was done. Her sleeve tore at the seam, white fabric streaked with dirt and blood. Most passengers turned away, pretending not to see, pretending not to hear. She broke free just as the whistle blew again. Her hands shook as she stumbled back into her seat, breath ragged, heart pounding against her ribs. Now, she stood trembling, her dignity in tatters, her body shaking, her soul barely holding on. The hot summer wind stung her face. The platform shimmered under the noon sun. She wanted to disappear, but then a deep voice called from the shadows. "You, Grace Whitmore." She turned, and there he was. Colt McAllister, 46 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a weathered hat that shaded eyes the color of thunderclouds before rain. A scar cut across his cheek. His hands looked built for labor and forgiveness all at once. He took one look at her torn dress and said nothing. Just took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was quiet, simple, but it broke something inside her. "You're Colt," she whispered. He nodded once. "You came a long way for a man like me." "I came for a promise," she said, voice barely steady. He studied her, then motioned toward the wagon hitched nearby. "Let's get you off this platform." The wheels creaked as they rolled away from the empty station, dust rising behind them like smoke from an old sin. Grace sat silent, clutching his coat, the scent of leather and tobacco grounding her. After a while, she asked, "Did you write all those letters?" Colt's hands tightened on the reins. "My brother wrote most. He passed last winter." Grace's eyes burned. She had crossed the country for a ghost. And now, sitting beside a man carved from sorrow, she realized the West wasn't a dream. It was a test. But something in his voice when he said her name made her heart stumble, because before summer's end, she would look him in the eye and say the words that no woman had ever dared. "Give me the full 11 inches. But what could that possibly mean to a broken man and a girl running from hell? The wagon rattled down the dirt road, wheels squealing over stones baked by the sun. Grace sat quiet beside Colt, his coat still around her shoulders. Every mile carried her farther from fear, yet deeper into something she didn't understand. The land rolled out wide, green and gold, stretching farther than she could dream. Colt pointed once toward the horizon. "That's my place. Ain't much to look at. But she's mine." When they reached the ranch, Grace saw a small cabin leaning under the weight of years, a barn missing half its boards, and a patch of corn fighting for life in the dry soil. Still, the air smelled clean. Free. Colt helped her down, his rough hand wrapping gently around her waist. That brief touch made her heart trip over itself. Inside the cabin, everything was simple. A table, 2 chairs, a coffee pot older than she was. Colt poured her a cup, black as sin, and said, "You drink it or it'll drink you." She laughed softly for the first time that day. It wasn't funny, but it felt human. Then he walked to the window, pulled out an old measuring tape, and motioned her to follow him outside. "You see this dirt?" he said, kneeling. "It's 11 inches deep. That's the good stuff. The kind that'll feed us if we treat it right." Grace stared, half lost in thought. He said it with such pride, such weight, that the words tangled in her mind. Her cheeks flamed. She thought he meant something else, something wild, something that made her blood rush to her ears. She stepped back, clutching her skirt. I came here for marriage, Mr. McAllister. Not for that. Colt blinked. Then a low laugh rolled from his chest, deep and warm. Lord, no, ma'am. I was talking about the land. He held up the tape measure with a grin. The soil's 11 inches deep. Not me. Grace froze, then let out a shaky laugh of her own. For the first time, the fear in her eyes turned into something lighter. Something like hope. As the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky orange, Colt said quietly, "You stay. We build this together. You go. The ticket back's yours." Grace looked at the wide field glowing under the last light of day. 11 inches of earth, maybe 11 inches of fate. But what she didn't know was that the night would bring a secret buried even deeper than that soil. That night, the wind howled outside the cabin, rattling the windows like an old memory trying to get in. Grace couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the crackle of the fire and the slow rhythm of Colt's boots pacing on the wooden floor. He moved with a limp she hadn't noticed before. Every step sounded like it carried more weight than just bone and pain. When she finally sat up, he froze by the window, staring into the dark. "You always walk like that?" she asked softly. He smiled without turning. "Rodeo accident. Bull tossed me in '93. Been paying rent to my limp ever since." Something in his voice made her smile. Not pity, but respect. He was a man carved from hard work and bad luck, and he wore both with pride. The next morning, she found him outside splitting wood shirtless and the sun catching every line of his back. She looked away quick, but not quick enough. Colt caught her staring. "You ever chop wood, city girl?" "No, but I've broken hearts." He laughed, low and surprised, and for a moment the space between them didn't feel so heavy. Weeks blurred into one another, each one pulling them closer without either saying a word. Grace learned to milk the cow, hang laundry in the Wyoming wind, and then cook beans that didn't taste like boot leather. She started humming again, just little tunes she remembered from Boston. Colt showed her how to aim his old rifle, saying every woman in Wyoming ought to know how to scare off a coyote. She never fired, but she liked the way he stood close behind her, steady as a mountain. Sometimes Colt joined in, humming off key, and they'd both end up laughing till their sides hurt. But at night, when the laughter faded, Grace still woke from dreams of the train, of hands grabbing, voices jeering. The sound of her own scream swallowed by the whistle. Sometimes Colt would find her sitting by the fire, shaking, and just pour her coffee without a word. He never asked what happened. He just stayed. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, he spoke quiet. "You know, you don't owe me anything. You can leave any time." She looked at him and whispered, "Maybe I'm not here 'cause I owe you. Maybe I'm here 'cause this place is the first one that feels real." He didn't reply. He just nodded once, eyes on the horizon, the same horizon that was slowly binding their hearts together. And somewhere deep inside, Grace knew that this quiet man was still hiding a truth far heavier than any piece of land, a truth that could break both their hearts before the harvest came. So stay right there. "My friend, pour yourself a warm cup of tea. Tell me what time it is where you are, and what corner of the world you're listening from, and if you'd like to hear how this story unfolds, hit that little subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next." By the middle of July, the ranch started to change. The corn pushed higher. The fields turned gold under the sun. And Grace found herself smiling more than she had in years. She'd grown used to the sound of Colt's boots on the porch at dusk, the way he'd clear his throat before saying goodnight, and the smell of coffee always waiting by the fire each dawn. There was comfort in his silence, like sitting beside a strong river you didn't need to cross to understand, but even rivers hide deep things. One afternoon, Grace went looking for him and found Colt out near the far fence, kneeling by a small wooden cross half sunk in the earth. He didn't see her. His hat lay on the ground, his hand tracing a name carved into the wood. A small tin locket hung from the cross, catching the afternoon light. Grace could see a boy's smile inside, faded by sun and time. Tim McAllister. She froze. That was the name signed on the last letter she ever got before coming west. The man she thought had written all those gentle words. She watched Colt's shoulders tremble once, then go still. When he finally turned and his eyes were red from dust or maybe from memory, he didn't bother to hide it. "You were never meant to meet me, Grace. Not me, but the man he wanted me to be. My brother wrote those letters before the sickness took him. He wanted someone to believe in this place, believe in me." Grace felt her chest tighten. She wanted to speak, but the words caught behind her tongue. "You lied to me," she whispered. He nodded. "Yeah, I did, but not for what you think. I didn't want pity. I just didn't want him to die with his dream buried." The wind picked up, stirring the tall grass like restless ghosts. Grace stepped closer, her hand trembling. She could have walked away right then, but something deeper held her still. "You don't have to carry his dream alone," she said. Colt looked down at her hand resting on his arm, the first touch that didn't feel like mercy but belonging. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Even the prairie seemed to hold its breath. That night, rain came sudden and hard, washing the dust off the roof, filling the air with the smell of wet earth. Grace lay awake listening, wondering if forgiveness could grow in soil that deep. But by morning, something far darker would rise from that same ground. The rain that night was the last they saw for weeks. By mid-August, the earth cracked open, dry as bone. The corn curled brown. Dust clung to her throat with every breath, turning the air into something they could chew but not swallow. The well dropped to a whisper, and every living thing on the McAllister ranch began to thirst. Grace tried to stay hopeful. She sang while she worked, carrying buckets from the creek, but each day the water got lower. Colt said little, though the worry had already carved deeper lines across his face. The limp in his step grew worse, and his temper with it. When the creek finally ran to mud, Colt hitched the wagon and rode into town. He returned hours later, eyes hard, jaw tight. "They're keeping the water. They claim my brother owed them money before he died. Guess they're collecting debt and water now," he said. "The ranchers up north dammed the stream. Said we ain't part of their circle no more." Grace stared, stunned. "But you helped them build that bridge last spring." Colt laughed once, bitter as old whiskey. "Yeah, funny how friendship dries up faster than a well." She reached for him, but he pulled away, sitting on the porch staring at the horizon. The silence between them stretched like the empty sky. That night, Grace wrote a letter she never sent. She wrote about fear and how loneliness could make even the strongest man crumble. Then she tore it up and walked outside, where the moon hung low and red over the fields. She found Colt standing by the barn, shoulders sagging, eyes on the stars. "Maybe I was wrong to bring you here," he said. "This place kills everything I love." She stepped closer, voice trembling. "Then let's fight it. Let's fight the land, the drought, the damn people too, if we have to." Colt looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, something fierce lit in his eyes. "You'd stand up to all of Pine Ridge for me," she smiled. "I'd stand up to the whole West if I had to." And right then, the air shifted. Lightning flashed far off in the dark, like a warning from the heavens. Somewhere out there, men were whispering Colt's name with spite, and the trouble that was coming would test every inch of the 11 he had left, because sometimes the storm doesn't fall from the sky. Sometimes it rides straight toward you on horseback. Then the heat came back harder, and by the third week of August, the earth split wide, gasping for water. The corn drooped like tired souls, and even the wind forgot how to sing. Grace watched Colt pacing the porch, silent, stubborn, his eyes fixed on the dry creek. He looked like a man trying to hold the whole world together with his bare hands. One evening, she walked out with 2 cups of coffee and set one beside him. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said. He didn't answer right away. Finally, his voice came rough and low. "I keep asking myself if it's worth it. This land and this fight, maybe some dreams are meant to die." Grace leaned forward, her hands wrapped around the cup. "No, Colt, dreams don't die. People just stop believing. And belief is what keeps a place alive." He looked at her then, really looked. Her face was flushed from the heat, her hair stuck to her neck, yet her eyes burned bright as the prairie fire. She smiled. "You told me this soil was 11 inches deep, that it could grow anything if we worked hard enough. Maybe what it needs most right now isn't water. Maybe it's faith." Colt blinked, caught off guard by her strength. And in that moment, something shifted. The drought was still there, but the hopelessness cracked first. They spent the next morning digging trenches, trying to save what crops they could. Neighbors passed by, watching, whispering. But Grace didn't stop. Every handful of dirt she threw was a small act of defiance, a reminder that giving up was never the answer. As the sun dropped, she stood beside Colt, both covered in sweat and dust, and her voice was soft but steady. "You can't control the rain, Colt, but you can control the fight inside you. The West doesn't reward the strong, it rewards the stubborn." He smiled, slow and tired. "Guess we'll fit right in then." Grace laughed. "Guess we will. And maybe that's the real lesson, my friend. When life dries you out, dig deeper. When people turn their backs, plant your roots anyway, 'cause sometimes faith is the only rain that ever comes." Hit that like button if you felt something, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the storm finally comes to Pine Ridge.